along with his security detail.
God bless our president! I will die for him! I will die for that man!
Waving to jubilant supporters as he rolled down the road and back into the Walter Reed facility.
Well, that is true to form Donald Trump, and probably the best sign that he's doing quite well, a drive-by for all of his fans gathered here outside the hospital.
Minutes earlier, he posted this video from inside the presidential suite.
We have enthusiasm like probably nobody's ever had. Our people that love the job we're doing, we have more enthusiasm than maybe anybody.
And suggested he's only now getting a full understanding of the virus that's killed 210,000 of his countrymen.
It's been a very interesting journey. I learned a lot about COVID. I learned it by really going to school. This is the real school. This isn't the let's read the book school. And I get it, and I understand it.
Despite the display of strength, it's becoming clear this isn't a mild case of COVID-19. The president's doctors have revealed they're trying out a third treatment in as many days.
Over the course of his illness, the president has experienced 2 episodes of transient drops in his oxygen saturation.
The latest drug is dexamethasone, a common steroid that's meant to reduce inflammation of the lungs and calm the body's immune response. The World Health Organization advises its use for COVID-19 should be limited to severe or critical cases. His medical team won't describe the condition of the president's lungs, but they remain optimistic.
If he continues to look and feel as well as he does today, our hope is that we can plan for a discharge as early as tomorrow to the White House, where he can continue his treatment course.
There was also an attempt to clean up yesterday's chicanery. Doctors revealing their claim the president hadn't been given oxygen the previous day was untrue.
I was trying to reflect the upbeat attitude that the team, the president, that his course of illness has had.
When you're treating a patient, you want to project confidence, you want to lift their spirits, and that was his intent.
This is the hospital suite where the president is resting. He's clearly still focused on the campaign, tweeting polls that suggest his illness hasn't hurt his election chances.
Pray for our president!
If he is discharged from hospital soon, these fans will be waiting for him on the campaign trail. David Lipson, ABC News, Maryland.
The parents of an Australian toddler killed by the port explosion in Beirut have spoken publicly for the first time. They've told Four Corners of their frantic efforts to save their son in the chaos after the terrifying blast. Survivors who filmed the explosion have also told their stories. Adam Harvey has this exclusive report.
This was the moment one young couple's big day became their nightmare.
It was the end of mankind. I didn't know what was happening, just that this day isn't meant to be like this.
A smaller explosion just before the main blast had grabbed the city's attention. So many people were filming as a huge cache of ammonium nitrate detonated in a dockside warehouse.
I don't even know if I jumped or the waves pushed me, but what I noticed the next second is that, or I don't know how long time after, that I was on the floor.
An Australian family lived just 700 metres from ground zero. UN worker Sarah Copland and her husband Craig Ohlers are speaking about their ordeal for the first time to Four Corners.
It's so beyond imagination. And I just remember I was just screaming, my baby, help my baby.
2-year-old Isaac Ohlers had been wounded by flying glass. His parents fought through the chaos to get him to hospital.
Anytime we got to an intersection, I was screaming at everyone to get out of the way.
An emergency team worked on Isaac for over an hour, but he couldn't be saved. His parents had tried to leave Beirut before the explosion because of coronavirus, but the first tickets available to Australia were for 3 weeks after the blast. They're now finally back in Perth, awaiting the birth of a baby boy. Adam Harvey, ABC News.
Ethnic Armenian officials say 21 servicemen have been killed in fighting with Azerbaijan as the conflict over the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region continues. It comes after Azerbaijan accused Armenia of launching missiles into residential areas of the city Ganja, injuring dozens. Maximilian Hess is the head of political risk at Hawthorne Advisors in London, and he says it doesn't look like the fighting will stop anytime soon.
Sadly, we've reached an impasse in the conflict, and it appears likely that both sides are prepared to escalate further. We saw the Azeri president, Ilham Aliyev, yesterday make demands that Armenia withdraw all of its forces from what are Azeri borders as defined by their lines of control in the Soviet collapse, but Armenia has effectively controlled the Nagorno-Karabakh territory and a number of surrounding districts since 1994. It does appear Azeri forces may have made advances in some key areas, but for the next stage, there's a very high risk of civilian casualties. We just saw yesterday heavy shelling of Stepanakert, the capital of Nagorno-Karabakh under Armenian control. The Azeris have accused the Armenians of shelling Ganja, the second largest city in Azerbaijan, as well. So there really is quite a bit of potential for more escalation. And while the OSCE and some other partners have called for mediation, really the conflict has run on for so long without any major international effort to try to address it, and a number of internal dynamics have left in both countries have left us in this situation, sadly, without an easy off-ramp, so to speak.
And how are other countries' support, or as you mentioned, lack of support or intervention for either side playing into this conflict?
Sure. Well, Armenia is a member of the CSTO, Russia's defense treaty organization. Essentially, it's equivalent to NATO that sprung up in the aftermath of the Soviet collapse. Its collective defense treaty has never been tested. There is a lot of doubt in Armenia about Russia's role, given that it has also served as a major supplier of arms to Azerbaijan. But Russia has one of its largest military bases abroad in Armenia proper. The CSTO treaty explicitly does not include a right to intervene on behalf of Armenia over fighting in Karabakh itself. But the Armenians may look to push that. Pashinyan has threatened essentially to recognize Karabakh's independence and potentially to seek a more formalized state. But the Russians, while they would potentially intervene if the conflict really got into Armenia itself, in part because they do have some opposing interests to the Russians, they're very keen to continue to be able to play both sides against one another. The largest change that we've seen is Turkey more openly supplying weapons and foreign fighters now reportedly as well to Azerbaijan. Although they have not had diplomatic relations with Armenia for quite some time and have very poor relations as well, this move to really be supportive of an Azeri offensive is quite a new development in the conflict.
Meanwhile, the US, who the Armenian leader has reached out to for help, seems just too busy to pay any attention.
Yes, well, the perhaps sad irony for the South Caucasus is it's two recent conflicts, this one and the Russian-Georgian War in 2008, have both come at the height of U.S. presidential elections, but neither has or seems likely to really become an election issue. There's a question about what are the U.S.'s core interests at stake here, but it does put the U.S.'s alliances in an awkward position. The Armenian Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan, led a democratic revolution 2 years ago and has sought to liberalize the country somewhat and has resumed trying to improve relations with the West. However, Turkey is a NATO member. Turkey is very keen to support Azerbaijan at this stage. Of course, there are tensions about Turkey's own membership within NATO, but should it get dragged into the conflict, it would be a very awkward position. Whereas at the same time, Azerbaijan has also balanced its sort of interest. As mentioned, it buys a lot of weapons from Russia, but is not in a military alliance with it of any sort. But it has proven a very pliable and useful partner, often in the U.S. war on terrorism, although this has led to many criticisms given the corruption around its regime.
And just finally, how do you see this playing out? Can the fighting be brought to an end?
I certainly hope that the fighting can be brought to an end, but it will require cooler heads to prevail locally, or if the conflict really devolves into yet another stalemate, perhaps with a slight shifting of the trenches. The territory in Nagorno-Karabakh, Nagorno comes from the Russian for mountainous, is very difficult to pass. Although we do have some reports indicating Azeri advances, particularly in the southeast and around the town of Talish in the north, to really push into Stepanakert and into the heart of Nagorno-Karabakh to dislodge the Armenian forces would require a major offensive. We do see both sides having really sort of, especially the Azeris, having upped their military capabilities in recent years. Regrettably, at this stage right now, given the relative lack of international engagement and the bellicose rhetoric escalating from both sides, as well as the apparent targeting or accidental shelling, it's too early to determine, of civilian areas over the last 24 hours. It sadly appears set to escalate further.
Maximilian Hess, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a long year for Territorians with loved ones in Victoria, and now after months of restrictions, there's finally some good news for those wanting to travel. From next month, the Northern Territory will allow people from most areas outside of Melbourne to freely travel to the NT without the need to quarantine, but only if case numbers remain low.
Those Territorians who've been separated from friends and family in regional Victoria finally have something to look forward to. Quarantine-free travel for most people from this part of Australia from November the 2nd.
We've drawn the conclusion, and this has been forming for some weeks, that regional Victoria is of very low risk.
Regional Victoria has crushed the coronavirus. The critical factor for making this decision is regional Victoria's success in easing their restrictions without spreading the virus.
But there are some exceptions. People in Greater Geelong, the Macedon Ranges and the Mitchell and East Gippsland Shires are not in the clear just yet.
We're holding back on these 4 areas for now, given they've had a confirmed case in the past fortnight.
As the Territory moves to open up its borders even further, with the hotspot for Sydney-siders lifting on Friday and a New Zealand travel bubble in 2 weeks, those in charge of the health emergency are pleading with Territorians.
If I could just appeal to our Territory community, we must remain vigilant. If we're going to enjoy the benefits of opening up, we have to, every one of us, behave extremely carefully.
The Deputy Chief Health Officer is urging Territorians to start wearing masks in places where physical distancing might not be possible. He also said that after dark venues in the Northern Territory at the moment were presenting a bit of a problem because of the consumption of alcohol and the fact that lots of people have been gathering together in close proximity. He said that some of these venues could expect extra monitoring over the next few weeks.
What we're looking to those industries to do and those pubs and clubs is to actually have their own marshals. It's not quite the right word, but people who understand exactly what's required and to work with their patrons on those issues.
In the Barkly region, there's still some anger about pipeline workers from the company Gemina, who've come from Victoria, being allowed to quarantine in a Tennant Creek hotel without sharing their COVID safety plan with the local Aboriginal Health Service.
Why is there such secrecy around sharing the Gemina COVID plan? And why can't it be shared? I mean, I would expect roll out the effective response, to a positive case that would require some coordinated action.
The Chief Health Officer's team says it's confident that plan minimises any risk to an acceptable level. Felicity James, ABC News.
Well, the Northern Territory government has extended emergency restrictions aimed at reducing the amount of alcohol that reaches remote communities. The rules were first introduced last month and mean customers who don't have a Darwin address are asked where they plan to drink.
From his Palmerston community of 15 Mile, Aboriginal elder Philip Goodman has seen the damage caused by alcohol and grog running.
We face problem nearly every fortnight.
He's welcomed the extension of the new rules that see people who try to buy alcohol in Darwin and don't have a local address asked where they are drinking. If the seller isn't satisfied, they can refuse the sale. Mr Goodman thinks it sends a strong message to grog runners and should be made permanent.
You're going to be worried about this new law now. You're going to start realising you're going to start pull your socks up.
The government introduced the new restrictions after a spike in grog running, including reports of people paying close to $1,000 for a bottle of rum. The rules have only been extended for one more week, but could continue long term.
What we are noticing is that there are reductions in alcohol-related harm and alcohol-related offending in our remote communities.
Some retailers are concerned the rules could be discriminatory.
We've already had instances where Indigenous people have turned up and said, well, we got flatly refused to get any service at all at certain other licensed venues. And I go, well, there's a case for discrimination if you're not careful as well.
We're not going to jump down on a licensee for a minor discretion, and we're not interested in punitive action in relation to minor incidents. We're targeting people who are doing this as a business, who are profiting from the harm in remote communities.
But in 15 Mile, it's alcohol harm that has residents most worried.
Some people say you might be looking down a barrel of racial discrimination. I think that's not it.
We're just worried about their health, their children.
NT Police say a report assessing the impacts of the changes will be finalised this week. Kate Ashton, ABC News.
A new report has found harassment and abuse are the norm, not the exception, for girls and young women on social media. 2/3 of Australian girls and young women surveyed said they'd experienced abuse online. The E-Safety Commissioner says the results show misogyny is alive and well in Australia. Social Affairs correspondent Norman Hermont reports.
Hi Mum, how are you doing?
Angelica Ochinaka is back home with her latest academic update.
I was trying to do a lot of my thesis proposal stuff.
The master's student is passionate about gender equality and diversity. And when she goes on social media, she's prepared for the worst.
The types of comments that can come through are about, my features or about my identity as a woman, and they can be very racist in nature.
For her studies and advocacy, social media is essential. Sometimes the responses are brutal.
Calling me obscene things like an ape, monkey, and for myself, I'm used to that. I know that as a black woman, that's the type of thing that we encounter.
Harassment and abuse are common experiences for girls and young women online, according to a new report from charity Plan International. As part of a worldwide survey, it spoke with 1,000 girls and young women in Australia aged 15 to 25. 65% reported behaviours such as body shaming and threats of sexual violence. That was higher than the global figure.
We know that women experience online abuse at much higher levels and in different ways than men, and in ways that are sexualized, they're personal, they're violent.
Advocates say that abuse is also forcing young women to self-censor online. Maya Gasali knows that all too well after an older man she'd met at a professional event sent inappropriate messages.
Ever since then, I've always been a bit hesitant on what I post, on my public account, because I feel like I'm being, judged before I even send.
Advocates are pushing social media giants to do more, so users like Maya can go online without fear. Norman Hermont, ABC News.
Tourism operators in Singapore are hoping a government campaign will encourage citizens to travel domestically and rediscover attractions off the beaten path. One such historic location, hidden deep within the bustling city-state, is already proving a big hit with travellers. Rachel Merritt reports.
Nestled amongst Singapore's sprawling metropolis, a remnant of the past. Kampong Lorong Buangkok is the last surviving traditional village on the island. A once sleepy dwelling hidden amongst the high-rises and city lights, it's recently become a hive of activity for domestic tourists seeking adventure and novelty while borders remain shut.
Because my kid, who has never been to kampong setting in Singapore, I think it's good that he does know that it is something like that here. It's not just overseas like Malaysia or Thailand or Philippines.
It's all part of a $46 million local tourism package to restart the local economy. Trips to the village have been almost fully booked out since they began in September.
More and more people start to come out because they couldn't go travel anywhere, so they try to book something to do in Singapore. And that's where we try to capture them and to tell them that, oh, there's actually more places in Singapore than you ever known.
Built in 1956, the village has withstood the fast-track urbanisation project taking place around it. Visitors can view the traditional wooden homes, once a common sight on the island, and learn about time-honoured tools and plant life. While tourists have been visiting the site for years, Kampong locals say they're growing used to the extra influx of visitors.
Initially we are very uncomfortable because tourists will start to come and look at us. We took the initiative by going out and talk to them.
Singapore has managed to flatten the COVID-19 curve following a second wave. With the trend heading in the right direction, tourism operators are hoping the low infection numbers will encourage more people to holiday at home. Rachel Merritt, ABC News.